So one of the coolest things that came out of SwiftUI this year was mesh gradients, and Apple used this everywhere. And I mean, like, if you look at Apple Intelligence, every time that you're doing a prompt, it's just showing the buttons. And here we're creating a really nice animated mesh gradient on top of the button. And as you can see, I'm trying to make it super simple for you to understand and how to apply it. And I found a way, which is kind of cool, so I'm excited to show you. Now, what we're going to learn, we're going to, first of all, put that into a component so that it's easy. And then when we go to the component, this is where we can customize. And I'm going to make it super easy. Typically, a lot of tutorials make it super complex using timeline view and really complex functions. So I'm going to keep it super simple. And at the same time, we're going to learn animations in SwiftUI, like the most basic form of animation. And we're going to apply that to the mesh gradient. So you can see we can have multiple colors. We can customize something like this. And we're going to start with, a very simple mesh gradient. This is from Apple, by the way, but also you can customize all the colors. I think, you're going to end up with something that is very custom, very exciting, and you can make it to the image of your app and your buttons. Now let's start at the very beginning. We are starting with the UI that we have created so far, and we can find that we're applying this mesh gradient to the background of a button. So very straightforward. Now, why do we need to create a component? Well, because we want to make it reusable, and also we wanted to isolate it in a way that if there's a lot of code, we can make sense of that code. Versus, if I wanted to do all of that code here and add the animations, then it's going to be mixed with the other code, and it's going to become super confusing about what is part of the mesh gradient and what is not. So that's why we're going to create a component, and I'm going to show you how. So first of all, you want to go to the navigator right here, and you want to right click on it, and you want to use a new file from template. So we're essentially creating a new SwiftUI file, and we're going to select SwiftUI, view, next. We're going to name this one animated mesh gradient. Now, usually the naming convention is the custom name itself finished with what is the type of component that is. Typically, you would name view for pretty much everything because everything is a view, but in this case, it can be a little bit cumbersome to have everything named view because it adds a word to every single file name. But also, I like to name view for like major screens, for example. I like to name view, but otherwise, I just go with mesh gradient button or animated mesh gradient because it's a gradient that we're going to be creating. So this is a pretty good name, and the number one rule is just to make sure that you're not mixing with the official names of their components, such as mesh gradient. So if you do that, you will end up with errors. So in this case, I know that Apple doesn't have anything named mesh gradient, which is why I'm going to create a component. And then we're going to copy, right? So first of all, we're going to go back to the content view. We're going to cut this, so Command X, and we're going to type the name of the mesh gradient that we just created. So finish with parentheses, and this is going to call whatever view that we just created. Right now, you can see in the background, it says Hello World, and we're gonna go to that component, select the text, and paste that. So this is going to show the mesh gradient that we had before, and because it's referenced in content view, you can see that we put it back. Now, oftentimes when you're creating a component, you can see that the modifiers are not correctly indented. So you can select the code and you can do Control I to automatically indent the code. So now everything looks super clean, and so now we can ignore the save area. You don't need to apply ignore necessarily to the mesh gradient itself. You can actually just apply it to the preview if you don't want it to be part of the component. So I can just do ignore save area, and now we have this full screen, which is great. And we can also play with different colors. As I mentioned before, this is part of the Apple sample code. So another one that I found was from the WWDC video about custom effects. I'm going to link all of that stuff along with the code. So we have different colors, but also we can have the entire mesh gradient replace along with the points. As you can see, there's a little bit of customizations on the center one. The other ones are pretty much exactly the same as what I had. So now we have this beautiful kind of arc thing that looks like a sky. I think that looks really good. And that just goes to show you that when you change the points, you're really mixing and you're creating these shapes for the mesh gradient. Now you might be wondering, well, how do I animate this and what is the simplest way? So let's learn about animation, let's learn about state, because you know, if you're making a React app or a SwiftUI app, it's all about the states, because it's, you know, you have a beginning and an end. That's what animation is, and then you kind of take care of the transition between those states. So how to create a state? Well, at the very top, right above body, you're going to set at state var appear. So we're going to use an appear animation, and is equal to false. So this is a state, and a state is basically a variable and can be different types of variables. So if you've done Figma, for example, you have multiple kind of states, you know, like Boolean, you have a string, you have a number, etc. And all of those different types have different functions. So a number can increase, you know, a text can change the content, and then Boolean is like true or false. So those kind of like the basics of state. I'm going to keep this super simple. We have appear state, and the goal here is that when this view is showing, so when this animation is showing, we're going to start the animation. So we have the state, nothing is going to happen, of course. Now we just need to add the event, the trigger. So the trigger is, you know, as soon as we see this, so dot on appear. So you have multiple events, of course, and curly braces. Then we're going to call the state. So appear toggle. All right, that's fairly simple. And you know, what it does is that as soon as it appears, then we're switching between true and false. That's what the toggle is for. So at this point, you can play with any of these values. So for example, I'm going to start with the middle one, so the points, and I'm going to do appear question mark, and I'm going to set it to 0.05, otherwise the one that we have. Now you can barely see the animation, or at least the switch change. So you can just set it to true or false, and it's going to switch back and forth. There's no transition. And this is where we're going to apply the transition. To do that, we need to wrap the state change inside with animation. So this is what's going to apply that transition, and that's where the magic is going to start. So with animation, and we can use one of the timing, or we can just use the default one, right? And you can see every time that I do like a space, it's going to refresh and it's going to apply that animation using the default animation right now. And I can change the different animation timing inside the parentheses. So dot, for example, is in out, and autocompletion gives me a suggestion that's pretty cool. I can make it slower, like 2 seconds, and boom, we have a really nice animation. So this is the transition. We're able to change the different timing. If you look here, you can find different option for the timing. So for example, I can press dot, and now I have different ones: ease in out, bouncy, smooth, snappy, spring, which is really cool. And also we have linear, and some of those have a duration value, some of those don't, such as spring, for example. But in this case, let's stick to ease in out. It's probably one of the most popular ones by default. And now we want to auto reverse, so kind of like a ping-pong effect. So we're gonna have dot right after easing out, and here we have something called repeat forever, and also there's an option with auto reverse. So we're going to select this one, and we're going to set it to true, and watch what happens. So now it just go back and forth with the animation, and yeah, with just a few lines of code, I'm able to do animations to my mesh gradient. How awesome that is. Now this is where you, as a designer, you can customize and you can play with these values. So for example, I can set 2.5. Oh, I have a little change here. And as a result, you can simply apply the condition. So appear, if true, use this. If false, use this. So that's kind of like programming shortcuts, if you will. And that's programming is all about. So you're kind of making English as short, and you have super strict rules, and that kind of like creates this. So we can apply a set of values, so 2 values inside square brackets, or you can also apply per value. So appear question mark 0.5, otherwise 2.5. So now it's going to switch between the two. Now, yes, of course, as you experiment, it might not always work correctly. You might need to adjust the values and see how well it goes. And you can apply to any of those, and you can play with the colors as well. So for example, I don't want, for the top left, I want to switch between black and red. I can just do appear question mark black, otherwise dot red. Just make sure that you're applying the correct rules. That's the only thing about programming, is that it's very, very strict. You can't just put any word, any dot wherever you want. It has to apply those rules. So appear space question mark space dot black space colon space dot red. So dot black is a color, dot red is a color, and then we're setting that switch between the two colors, which is really, really awesome. And again, you can do with any of these colors, which is what is so cool. So if I want to change the green, I do the same thing, and I'm gonna switch to blue, for example, and now I have a super vibrant animation for my beautiful mesh gradient. Then of course you can be adventurous. You can play with the different timing, the different duration. You want to make it faster? Great. Use a duration of 0.5 even. Look at how fast that's going to be. And the other thing is, you can also create an additional state. And as a beginner, don't be afraid, because SwiftUI and Xcode is going to tell you if you're making a mistake. That's one of the powers. SwiftUI tells you right away where the error is, what you should change. If you made a mistake, it's just gonna, like for example, if I didn't write black correctly, it's just gonna tell me, hey, please fix this, and the color change and all that stuff. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. Make as many as you can so that you can learn how to fix them, and you're gonna get so much better. Now we're going to start creating a second. So appear 2, for example, And then I'm going to copy and paste with animation, the first one, and I'm just going to change it instead of appear, it's going to be appear 2. And I'm going to change the speed. So let's say 5 seconds for this one. And then, you know, let's say I want to switch between blue, maybe not blue, but let's say the middle one, let's say appear 2 space question mark and then colon, and then I'm going to set it to red. So this one is going to be a lot slower to switch between blue and red, as you can see. So yeah, you know, like you can play with these values. I'm going to share the different mesh gradients result that I have so far. So this is after playing with all of these values, with the different condition and the timing and all that stuff. So let me replace the mesh gradient and let me fix this. And now I can just play with the values of the speed of the animation, so the duration essentially. And yeah, we have something like this. I think my goal here is to make sure that all of these colors around the border is going to switch between blue and red, you know, the different rainbow color, because that's kind of like the Apple Intelligence colors, if you will. It's kind of rainbowish and it kind of switch. So I don't like, for that goal, I cannot have a constant color. So that's why we have something like this. Feel free to take the code from the description, and yeah, let's take a look. It's gonna look like this beautiful animated button with a lot of color change, and I think you can just play with this and have fun with it. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one. I'll see you in the next section.